our next talk by Jack Schmitt on field geology by the Apollo crew. I can see his new title, Apollo Geological Tool Assessment for Artemis. Take it away, Jack.
Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time, and hopefully we'll get more opportunity for Q&A, just going through not only the Apollo tools, but also some context with the potential landing at a South Polar site. Next, please. I do want to mention the deep drill first, because drilling cores, obtaining cores anywhere on the moon is going to be extraordinarily important. As some of you know, I'm deeply involved in the synthesis of all the analytical data as well as the field data related to the Apollo 17 deep drill core, almost 3 meter core that we obtained on 17. Getting 100% of the cuttings out of the drill are absolutely essential, because the regolith, anywhere you are, is going to be essentially incompressible. And once you try to withdraw the core, drilling it is not the problem. Getting the core out, the fragments in the regolith rotate into the flutes that are removing cuttings, and make it very difficult to remove because the fragment doesn't have anywhere to go. It's surrounded by incompressible regolith. Now, also, anytime we drill in the future, I hope that, particularly deep drill, we will automate, if at all possible. The physical and time-consuming aspects of drilling these holes is unfortunate. And as Dean says, EVA time is extraordinarily valuable. And we need to figure out if we can automate and anchor the drill so that you're not physically having to anchor it as an astronaut. The LTV design, as it comes along, almost certainly needs to be amenable to anchoring a deep drill equipment, even if it's not automated. And also, we need to think about, how do you retain the upper core? I think in the Apollo 17 core, we lost about 10 centimeters in the handling of that core as it was put into, actually added to the Lunar rover. But upper core retention is important, not critical, but important. Next, please. Now, the polar regolith is basically unknown at this time. There are really 3 major potential characteristics of that regolith. It could be Apollo-like, that is incompressible below about 10 centimeters. Ice, if present, would just be another fragment type, and complete removal of cuttings will still be required in any kind of drilling operation. Now, secondly, ice may be there as a rock in clumps. It'll behave like rocks during fluted core extraction, but drilling should be very similar still to what we experienced on Apollo 17. Now, if ice is present as a matrix, then we have an entirely different situation. As the Dave Carrier has mentioned, the regolith would become as hard as concrete, at least at depth, and drive tubes will not be very effective unless we figure out a way to have a hot point drill of some kind. Next, please. Geological sampling on Apollo has many different aspects. It begins, of course, with the planning that Dean has referred to, pre-mission mapping, the previous results of other missions and other information that may have come to light, and expert inputs. Not all expert inputs are the same, but nevertheless, they were very important in determining what types of samples we might find. I'll just use one example, is in the work leading up to Apollo 17, one of the hypotheses among multiple hypotheses for Shorty crater was that it might be volcanic. The resolution of the photographs that we had did not fully convince us that it was an impact crater. And so we carried in the back, at least I carried in the back of my mind, the possibility that we might see evidence of volcanic activity at that crater. It turns out that was not the case, but still, when I noticed the coloration in the rim of Shorty, that turned out to be the orange soil, which later obviously became obvious on Earth to be volcanic pyroclastic ash. It did confuse the initial thoughts that I had about interpreting that orange soil. And you'll see that wandering of my interpretations as we drove the rover back to the limb, actually back to Station 5 at Camelot Crater during that period. We won't get, unless somebody asks a question, won't go into the details of that interpretation, but still having those multiple working hypotheses are very important, and they actually enhance the sampling process because you're trying to gather information that'll confirm or deny the particular hypotheses that you have. Now, documentation starts with the eyes and the brain and the experience that is in that brain. The audio is very important in the documentation, particularly as, for example, on the orange soil, when Ron Wells began to put together an actual color representation of what that looked like to us on the moon. The audio transcript is a very important part of making those color adjustments based on what is actually in the emulsion of the film, but still you have to manipulate that emulsion in order to get the actual color. The camera then was very, very important for documentation, and the development at Shoemaker's recommendation of a gnomon that would provide local vertical, grayscale, color scale, and size scale was a very important part of the documentation. It has enabled extraordinarily important three-dimensional representation of various samples and sample sites. It particularly has become important in the interpretation and analysis of the magnetic properties of boulders at Station 5 on Camelot Crater, which gradually through geologic logic and interpretation, we've decided, I decided, and with Ben Weiss's efforts, we have come to the conclusion that they are wall rock boulders, not ejecta boulders. And so we were able to, again, with Ron Wells' assistance, rotate those boulders into the horizontal and actually get evidence, good evidence, consistent with a lunar dynamo, very much like what we now have on Earth, but obviously not there at the present time. Now, the sampling tools themselves, I found I was a bit surprised, but and I'm glad we did. We built the scoop, but I found it was my primary sampling tool, as you might now, in retrospect, expect to happen, given the origin of the regolith. The hammer was important, particularly for getting drive tube samples, but also every once in a while of getting a fresh sample, being able to look at a fresh sample face off a rock or a boulder that we encountered in various places. The so-called rake, which really was a sieve, gave us some very important information, and I recommend we continue to use that, about the size frequency, a rough idea of the size frequency distribution in various regoliths. For those of you who have followed this is particularly important in interpreting, important evidence in interpreting the light mantle deposit as an avalanche deposit, because the two rake samples that were taken there, one on the face of the slope of the South Massif and one on the light mantle themselves, were very, very different. The latter being having a very low concentration of rock fragments, mostly lunar regolith dust that's less than 100 micron. The gnomon I've already talked about. It's very important for geometric and color documentation of the various samples. Ancillary equipment that was important for us, and I have recommended that we continue to have them, were the extension handle. As you see here, I'm using on the rake that I just mentioned, and the various containment bags, sample bags, as well as the larger containment bags that you see hanging on the plis in this particular image. Now for Artemis, as Dean Epler has implied, there is some consideration by many of having what I would call the equivalent of a geologist's acid bottle here on Earth. Most geologists, when they work on Earth, carry an acid bottle, a dilute solution of hydrochloric acid, in order to distinguish various types of carbonates. That is not the only analytical tool that has generally been used by field geologists throughout the last 100 years. A digital camera almost certainly will be present on Artemis rather than the large film magazine camera that you see on my chest in this photograph. And also Artemis, I think, will benefit from what we have learned about boulder tracks. Two of the boulders we sampled off the North Massif actually have tracks. One we knew about when we sampled the boulders. The other we came to light because of the very fine lunar reconnaissance orbiter images of the North Massif. Those boulders respectively were station 6 and station 7 boulders. Now, one thing we did not do well in Apollo was to integrate the TV control, which was remote from Earth primarily, with the operational activities on the surface. In many cases, the efficiency of the AVA was interrupted because that TV was not following the action of the astronauts. And so the Capcom would interrupt trying to figure out what we were doing rather than having that information available instantly through the television. I strongly recommend that for Artemis, when they get into the field training, that the television operation be integrated with that field training. I think it'll increase the efficiency of the EVAs significantly, primarily by preventing interruptions from Capcom because somebody didn't understand what was going on operationally at the moment when the interruption occurred. Next slide. And finally, of course, the real tools, pardon expression, are the crew. And the training that Dean has documented was extraordinarily important. The early training was more a important, but still more of a GE-1A show and tell type of training. With the agreement of the Apollo 13 crew, I was able to introduce a much more simulation-based training that Dean has described. And you see another aspect of that training here in this photograph. I can't emphasize that enough as how important the field training on real geological problems and having to do real interpretations under the constraints, equipment constraints and camera constraints that we had for the crews was extraordinarily important in giving us the quality of sampling and observation and photography that we now have to deal with Apollo. So with that, I'll wait for questions.